Hey, it's Dan Morales. This is Home Buyer Radio, and this week I managed to coax another good realtor friend and partner of mine.
Heather Klontmaker.
Heather is with
EXP Realty.
All right. So anyways, you know what I've been doing lately is having some of my good realtor partners come in and we're just talking about the market, right? Like you and I were just talking about, the market and just, the value of relationships and stuff like that. And, it's been like an interesting market, wouldn't you say? Like, especially over the last, I think probably 6 months has probably been the most unique we've seen,
Yeah. February 2020, things changed literally on a dime to the most extreme seller's market that we've ever experienced. And while we are still in a seller's market, March, April of this year, interest rates changed, which is something you deal with all the time. And that quickly shifted the market again. No market is inherently a good or a bad market, but it's constantly changing, and we have to deal with those changes.
That's true. That's such a nugget of wisdom, right? Like, because sometimes people think, oh, I'm just going to wait for the market to change and it's better. Well, how do you define better?
And it could
right?
change for the worse.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I was just having this conversation with somebody the other day where I think like right now, especially for somebody who doesn't own a house, right now is the absolute best time for somebody to buy, because I think it's fair to say that there's less competition in the market right now.
Yeah, there is, and there's a variety of reasons for that. There's also less competition on the seller side. But, I think with buyers, the big thing is you have to be motivated. If you already have a home, it's a harder decision to make, because you might be going from a 2.95 interest rate or 3.5 or a 4% to a higher interest rate. So there has to be a little more motivation there. But for a buyer who doesn't have a home, you are paying 100% interest to your mortgage or to your landlord.
Yeah.
And, if you don't have a home and you want a home prices are continuing to go up. They're not going to go up the 10, 15, 20% they've been going up, but they're not expected to really drop here in West Michigan. Other parts of the country may be different.
Yep.
And so for buyers, if you don't own a home and you want to,
now's like a great time. And I think it's interesting because a lot of times people, they're paying rent. You get nothing. There's no tax benefits. You get nothing for it. You build no wealth, right? You have this expense, and oftentimes people can get across the finish line buying something, and it doesn't require, it requires far less than what people realize cash-wise. And oftentimes that monthly payment can be pretty comparable to what you're paying in rent. There's some places here, like in Holland, like $2,000 a month in rent.
Or
I'm like,
more.
what? Yeah.
Or more.
And I'm thinking to myself, gosh, you could go buy a house. Especially, if you think, I was just talking to a client the other day, they don't have a ton of cash, but they're looking at an area that they'd be eligible for the USDA RD loan. Okay, 100% financing. You don't have to have a ton of cash.
Right.
It's like, have the conversation with a good agent and a good lender. You might be surprised to find that there's ways that you can actually get across the finish line without having to have a boatload of cash into it when it's all said and done. And it just amazes me how often people maybe miss some of these opportunities. And you talked a little bit about like appreciation, right? I keep getting this. What do you tell somebody when you run into these discussions where they're like, I'm just going to wait for the market to crash? Because I know you get those questions like I do.
Yeah, we do get those questions, and I just go to data. I'm probably a nerd. I like to look at data. And so when you look at the last few recessions we've had historically, most of those have not seen a drop in home prices. Everybody remembers 2008.
Yep.
However, what they forget is housing caused that recession. Any
Correct.
recession that we may or may not go into, every day there's a different article that's either pro or for or against upcoming recession. But in most recessions, home prices do not go down much. Now, they might not appreciate like what we've seen over the last few years, but they continue to appreciate, or they hold steady. And, even with this supposed upcoming potential recession, when you talk to people who aren't selling news, who aren't selling bait-click articles, when you look at actual economists and CoreLogic experts in the national housing market, most will say if we were to lose home values, it's not going to be much. There are certain areas of the country where they are going to have declining home values. Holland, Michigan, West Michigan in general, not one of those areas. We have too low of inventory, too high of demand. We have people moving here for jobs. We have a great job market here still. We have lots of manufacturing companies. It's just, we're a little bit insulated from
Yeah.
what
Well,
could happen in other areas.
And I feel like that's always been the case, like historically here in West Michigan, that, you know, a lot of times other parts of the country will see like these extreme, you know, changes in an economic downturn where we historically haven't seen it that bad. And when you look at it, you know, we think about like appreciation and that, you know, it's kind of like real estate is like this super hyper local, you know, thing, right? Because I think people don't realize, like, so often you get these wide brushstrokes where they talk about, you know, real estate, you know, in these generalizations like nationwide house prices are this, that, and the other thing. And it's like, it doesn't matter, because like what happens in California is going to be very different than what happens in Holland, Michigan.
Yeah.
And what happens in Holland can be very different than what happens, let's say, in Lansing, you know, because they're different markets and there's different attributes to them, like you were talking about, where those attributes can make a difference on, you know, what happens. And I think even when you start getting into like let's say, you know, a city specific, there's some areas of the city that may fare better than others, right? You can't really, you know, use a generalization.
Right. Yeah. For Holland, for example, you know, over the last couple of years, we've seen this just kind of runaway appreciation. And so there's 2 points I want to make. One, even if we did lose a little bit in home value, we have gained so much over the last 2 years that if you've gained $50,000, $100,000 in equity and your house value declines by 10 or 20,000, you are still net positive for the
100%.
last 2 years, much more than historically you would have ever been. So that's
100%.
one point I want to make. And then the other point is when we look at, say, downtown Holland versus the townships. So I live in Park Township, and we sold our house in 2020, our last house, and then we built. And with that house we sold in 2020 already, fall of 2020, so we'd had, you know, February to September or whatever, our home value had went up in 2 years quite a bit. However, when you look at homes in downtown Holland, you have houses that would have been selling for $150,000, $175,000, going for $300,000 now. So from my perspective, and I haven't fully crunched numbers on that, but I feel like that in the downtown area, things appreciated at an even higher rate or even faster, because the way that the home prices compared in the last year or 2 years were so drastically different. Whereas in the townships, the prices had gone up, but they weren't doubling. They weren't, you know, so and that's over a couple of years. That's not in 1 year or anything, but it's been interesting here locally too, just seeing, you know.
And that's a great illustration of how you can be in just like one, you know, one market, Holland, you know, and how different areas can fare differently. Yeah. And that's where, again, somebody like yourself, who's an expert, knows what they're doing, knows those fine nuances, you know, where you can't just, you know, you could have a buyer that comes in and says, well, hey, you know, I think the values are going down. And you're like, well, yeah, that's cool that you think that, but that's not what's happening. Right. And if we're going to win in a what is really still a competitive market, because I keep telling people, if a house is priced right, it's going to sell.
Yes.
And it's still a very competitive market out there, you know, and there's more buyers getting back into the market.
Yes.
You know, I think people have realized, okay, interest rates went up some, but not to the point where it really is going to stop you from being able to buy, as much as there's more probably just a new reality of like, okay, it's going to cost me this. And the math still makes sense, because I think what happens too often is people get spun out on interest rates, and it's really never about the interest rate. It's about the monthly payment.
Yes.
Can I afford the payment? You know, is the payment one where it makes sense? Is it better than me renting? You know, it's really looking at the whole picture of somebody's financial situation and saying, okay, is there a way to structure this where that monthly payment is doable and you're going to be good when it's all said and done? And I don't think, like, I agree with you. I feel like here in the greater Holland area, you know, here in West Michigan in general, the economy tends to do well. I don't think we're going to see a decrease in value. I think you're going to see it slow down, which is good, because you can't have, you know, 20% year after year appreciation, because sooner or later, you know, then you have a whole different problem with affordability. And realistically, like your rent's going to go up too, right? Like, you know, because well, I'm just going to rent, you know, I'm going to sit on the sidelines. I'm going to rent. And it's like, okay, cool. You get no tax benefits. But more importantly, like you're just throwing those dollars away and you're not building any wealth.
Yeah. And what we're seeing too is, you know, some people will say, oh, well, the market's declining because they're seeing more price reductions. And that's the point that I make to my clients all the time. Price reduction is not the same as declining values.
100%.
Because what probably happened is that seller overpriced their home to begin with. So they're just
100%.
getting back to where the market is. It's not that the market has declined. They overpriced to start with.
Yep.
Last year we had people overpricing and they were getting it. Now you have to price according to the market.
Yes.
There's no more of this, I call it kind of bonus dollars, right?
Bonus
And
dollars.
that sellers were getting, and the terms that sellers over the last year were getting were just crazy. The loan, from what buyers were doing, it was for the most part pretty straightforward as long as they had cash, right?
Yep.
We didn't have seller concessions very often. There were certain loan types that just weren't getting accepted. And now we're back to a market where more people have an opportunity. People who
100%.
maybe had a loan type that wasn't getting accepted, or maybe who didn't have as much to put down, or didn't have $50,000 to pay over the appraised value, things like that,
Yeah.
right? Like, we're getting back to a market where there's actually more opportunity in that sense.
Yep.
And for sellers too, I mean, it would be a hard push to say, you know, I've had clients talk to me and say, we kind of want to sell, but, you know, because the interest rates, if we go for a less expensive house or a more expensive house, whatever, our payment is going to be in a less expensive house similar to what it is now, or
Yep.
vice versa. And at the end of the day, you make a move when it makes sense for your lifestyle, and there are creative
100%.
ways that we can structure loans. Like, you do that
100%.
every day,
Yep.
where there are ways that people can buy down their rate. They can do different
Yep.
things. And so when somebody sees that rate and they see that initial sticker shock, I always say, let's just like peel back the layers. Are there
Yes.
some things that we can do to make this more affordable?
100%.
Either in the short term with like a 3-2-1 buy down, something like that,
Yep.
or in the long term, do you want to just buy down your rate or get some seller concessions or things like
Yep.
that? Which, when you're doing seller concessions, that's not the seller necessarily taking less money. That just means you have to come in with a stronger offer price and then ask for those
100%.
concessions, right? So there are things that we can do that, you know, we're not going to probably get it to 2.875 or something, but, you know, we can definitely get it closer to where it was, say, 2019.
Well,
And,
you can make the
know,
math make a lot more sense
Yeah.
for somebody,
Mhm.
and I feel like a lot of times, you know, it comes down to structuring, and it really it's looking at somebody's overall total budget. Like, what do you have for, you know, your expenses all in the total, and can you make that monthly payment work in a way that it's affordable and you feel good about it when it's all said and done. All right, so how does somebody get a hold of you?
Yeah, so there are multiple ways. Call or text always works, and then you can always find me on Facebook or Instagram at Heather Clontmaker.
Okay, and what's your number where they can call or text you?
616-610-9948.
Awesome. Hey, I'm Dan Morales for Dart Bank. My MLS number is 709-729. And of course, Dart Bank is an equal housing lender. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week. Have a good one.